From Software has kind of got a style at this point. They make a very specific kind of game. And at this point, that game is just nail-bitingly, controller-smashingly, avatar-destroyingly hard. But despite that insane difficulty, and in fact probably because of it, games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne aren't just successful, but basically spawned an entire genre. A genre whose games I love almost universally. Wait, Lords of the Fallen, what are you doing? Get out of here, Lords of the Fallen, nobody likes you! So when I found out that From Software was making not only another game, but a Dark Souls game with fucking ninjas in it, I was so sold on that idea, it is actually hard to put into words. Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. I'm pretty sure I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not pronouncing that right, I'm gonna be pronouncing it wrong for the entire video. And it's gonna be Nostalrius all over again. I would argue that Sekiro is most certainly within the orbit of the Soulsborne genre, but it's probably the furthest thing from it. It is the Pluto of Dark Souls. It's still got a lot of the old trappings, the old tropes, the exploration feels the same, you still absolutely put a ring on your fucking combat arcs whenever you make an attack. Everything is there, but there are some changes and refinements that make it feel just new enough that I'm constantly haunted by a sense of uncanny valley while I play it. The movement system is beautiful and flowing, the combat system is deeper and more complicated, and the game in general is just fantastic, still striking that incredibly dour, depressing, nihilistic tone that all of the Dark Souls and Bloodborne games have been so good at striking. But it's really hard. If you read Steam reviews, then people are actually negatively reviewing this game because it's too hard. I'm actually probably okay with arguing that this is the hardest of the 5 From Software Soulsborne games. But why is it so difficult? I mean, I would argue that the combat system in Sekiro is basically just a reformulated version of standard Bloodborne combat. It's fast, it's flowing, it's got the same actions with a couple of changes for game flavor, essentially. But all in all, it's basically just a different ordering of the same things. So how can it be that much more difficult? Well, don't worry, dear viewer. I believe that's what you're here to hear me talk about for the next... I have no idea how long this is going to be. I'm not going to do that joke. That joke is overplayed. So I'm going to make 3, and for some reason on this channel it is always 3, arguments as to why Sekiro is harder and why that's actually probably a good thing. Because I feel like Sekiro gets to the very iron core of what makes Souls-likes and Soulsborne games so damn compelling. What makes their combat so much fun. But let's talk about it. But what I want to start off with is how Sekiro changes the way these games approach player progression. When I say player progression, I'm specifically talking about the power curve of how strong the player is. In Dark Souls and Bloodborne, you collect your experience points analog and then bring it to something, usually it's a lady somewhere, who then levels you up. By doing this, you get stronger. You can always turn around and grind enemies for more, and if you die, you drop them on the ground and have to recollect them, and hopefully you don't die again and lose them forever, like I have done way too many times. Specifically, these games give the players the option to go back to areas and grind a little bit to get a few extra levels. Getting these levels can give them a small advantage and can help them overcome a boss that they might be stuck on. These small advantages could be health or damage or whatever the player sees fit to level up. But this is not the case in Sekiro. Specific statistics such as attack damage and health are actually tied to specific boss encounters and exploration. This means that on any specific encounter, there is a point at which the player simply cannot get any more powerful. They can bring in whatever consumables they want, change up whatever gadgets they want, but they won't be able to level up. There is effectively a power ceiling to any given boss fight. There's a point where you just can't get any more powerful against them, because your available options are limited. You can't level up that way. Don't get me wrong, there are some power progressions that exist in the game, specifically in skill points. When you kill enemies, you get experience points. You get enough experience points, you get a new skill point, which you can invest in a skill. These are much more akin to Neo and their skill system, where it's more about specific combat techniques, or a couple of passive skills that might help you out. But they're nowhere near as momentous as adding a few more points to strength so you can do more damage against the boss. Nothing so simple exists within these skill trees. Instead, you're just getting a few new attacks, or getting a new passive that helps your potion heal a little bit more. So you're not really able to overpower any specific encounter by just leveling up a whole bunch. You have to face them head on. Which leads me to my next point. Sekiro is interested in mastering your character. So I think each of the Souls strains has a specific thing that its combat wants you to focus on. In Dark Souls, it really wants you to focus on persistence and picking your times to attack. In Dark Souls, you find yourself dodging combos, getting in close, maybe making specific blocks, and then when a boss exposes themselves to your attacks, not literally, you don't need no boss dick, you attack it. You get your hits in and then you back off. It's about persistence and perseverance. Bloodborne is kind of the opposite, where you are more rewarded for aggression and ferocity. Getting in a boss's face, doing a bunch of damage. When you take damage in Bloodborne, you get a small amount of health that you can just regenerate by hitting enemies, which is a nice bonus. In addition, Bloodborne's combat flows a lot better than Dark Souls. It's faster, it's more emphasizing dodges over blocks and defense. Sekiro seems to take lessons from both of these in some sense. In essence, Sekiro is interested in the player mastering all of the tools that they have available to them. Combat is quick and vicious. A lot of damage can be dealt in a very small amount of time, and on account of how boss mechanics work, which I'm going to get into in a second, you do want to be aggressive, but at the same time, you need to know when to hold back, reserve, protect yourself, and block. As has been pointed out by many a Steam review, this game requires a lot more mastery of your character than any of the previous ones. And that's because combat and character are considerably deeper than Dark Souls or Bloodborne. In Sekiro, you only have one weapon. You never get another one, other than gadgets that go into your prosthetic. But because of the nature of those gadgets and that weapon, you really are working from a far more narrow but far deeper pool of choices. All of the standard Dark Souls abilities are there. You've got your basic attack, dodge, and block. You can do a charge attack. You can do deflecting at the right time to perfect critical, essentially a parry. It's all there, but how it formulates into the combat system is a little bit more interesting. Enemies, especially bosses, but generally any sort of mini-boss or larger than a regular dude enemy, can only be killed with what's called a death blow. Death blows are basically the parry mechanic from Dark Souls and Bloodborne, but made mandatory and much, much, much flashier. Death blows can only be attempted against enemies who are vulnerable, and the only way to get enemies into a vulnerable state is to destroy their posture. Destroying posture generally is done through two things. Relentlessly attacking an enemy while it guards, or while it doesn't guard, it really doesn't matter, it affects the posture all the same, and by deflecting enemy attacks. The more you throw them off foot, the easier it is to get your big death blow in. Eventually their posture breaks and you can take them down. But posture regenerates throughout, and how fast this posture regenerates is based on how much vitality they have, which is essentially their health bar. If their vitality hits 0, they will also be vulnerable to a death blow because they basically instantly fill out their posture gauge because they're so weak. At that point, you can finish off the enemy, or in many bosses' cases, take off one of their many, many health bars. This system certainly has some nuance to it. If you're targeting an enemy's posture, you want to use attacks and tools that are really strong against enemy posture. If you're targeting their vitality, you really want to use tools that are good against vitality. You might want to lower an enemy's vitality if they regenerate their posture quickly, but if they don't regenerate their posture quickly, you might want to hammer their posture and then just break them instead of focusing on getting around their guard with big, slow, unwieldy attacks. More than any other Soulsborne, Sekiro requires mastery and understanding of all of the tools that you have available to you, and there are a considerable number of tools. This added complexity makes minute-to-minute combat feel a lot more refreshing, but it also makes it a lot harder. There was an illusion I saw in a review at one point in which the combat was compared to a rhythm game. You're choosing what beats to do for what attacks. Are you going to dodge this? Are you going to block this? Are you going to push this advantage? Are you going to use a tool? It just depends on what the enemy is doing. Eventually, you do find a rhythm in these boss battles, and once you've got that rhythm, they become considerably easier, until you get the first death blow in and they have another health bar and they enter their next phase and it completely changes the rhythm. The game is harder, but once you get the rhythm, it feels a lot more satisfying to fight your way through these bosses. But say you can't get the rhythm. For your first few attempts, you're probably not going to know the patterns, so you're not necessarily going to be able to block or dodge everything. What do? What are your options? Well, you're going to die. Quite frankly, the game punishes you real hard. I would argue harder than Bloodborne or Dark Souls. Mistakes are almost instantly fatal in a lot of cases. On the bright side, you have a resurrection mechanic that can pick you up, give you another chance before you actually die. But when you do actually die, and you will actually die, there is almost no question, the game really does punish you. In Sekiro, there is a different approach to how you lose things. In Dark Souls, when you die, you drop a corpse, and you can return to it to reclaim any of the souls you had on you at time of death. The problem in Dark Souls is not dying once, it's dying twice. This is the same for Bloodborne. If you can't reach your corpse, then you will lose everything on it. Sekiro doesn't give you this option. Every time you die in Sekiro, you lose half of your money and half of your experience to your next skill point. Gone. No corpse, no way to retrieve it. It's just gone. This does sound pretty dour, and Sekiro really does punish failure harshly. But there is one upshot. When you die, there is a mechanic that can potentially prevent you from losing anything. It's called Unseen Aid. The way Unseen Aid works is every time you die, you randomly have a chance to not lose your things. You will not take any penalty for death. This base chance is 30%, which means 3 in 10 times you won't lose your loot when you die. Unfortunately, this percent chance so far only seems to be able to go down. Every time you die, you spread something. You spread a disease called dragon rot. Dragon rot does not affect you. You are immune. It affects the NPCs in the world around you. And as they slowly rot and wither away, so too does your chance of unseen aid. That mechanic slowly tapers down in percentages until you're not earning anything back. Or at least your chances of saving anything upon death are minuscule. The more you die, the more dragon rot spreads. The more NPCs become afflicted, the lower that unseen aid gets. This is the second punishment for death. Repeated death slowly reduces the one mechanic that might save you from losing things to death. Between these two mechanics, between losing 50% of everything you hold every single time you die, and the slow reduction in your chance to maybe not lose 50% of everything you hold every time you die, results in a system that punishes death fairly harshly. This is the first time in a Soulsborne game I'm almost willing to say that death is not a feature. You will die, but really for the first time, Sekiro doesn't necessarily want you to, and if you do, you're going to get punished rather harshly for the privilege. You do have your resurrections, but resurrections are only a band-aid. They give you a second chance to not fuck up. But fucking up in Sekiro is easy, especially if you're not a master of the game's controls. If you don't understand the nuances of its combat system. You can have some serious trouble fighting some bosses, and you can wind up with some serious dragon rot spreading. And this can cause some serious problems. It's definitely a lot harsher than previous titles, even if it's not necessarily as noticeable. but death is something to be avoided. So, everything I've said so far sounds pretty dour. Yeah, the game is a lot harder, it asks a lot more from you, and it punishes you a lot more when you fuck it up. So, that doesn't sound fun at all. But don't worry. From Software have made some concessions to make all of these new difficulty layers work really well together. First of all is the game's resurrection system. So in Dark Souls, you're kind of meant to learn how to fight enemies through trial and error, and that usually means getting killed by something. And Sekiro admits that this is probably going to continue to happen, so it gives you kind of an easy out. At least once in a fight, that is. You can revive yourself when you are dead, getting right back up, not suffering the usual death effects of losing everything, and being able to jump back into the fight. You pop back up with about half of your normal health, but you will have hopefully learned from your mistake. Whatever killed you will preferably not kill you again. Preferably, it isn't always a reality, but at least it is another attempt. These extra deaths can save a boss fight that gets really close. It can feel frustrating to almost lose, but once you're getting the rhythm of these fights down, that extra resurrection might just be the little oomph you need to push it over the side. The mechanics of the resurrection are fairly simple. You get a certain number of revives, you generate the number of revives by how many enemies you kill, and you can only revive yourself once within a span of time. Usually, when you death blow something, you regain the ability to revive yourself if you have another token saved up. It's a fairly fair system. It allows you to kind of prepare for a fight by saving up a couple of tokens for resurrections and then get in there. You can very quickly learn from your deaths and jump back into a fight that was almost won almost right away. It's a nice system. It feels good. It's not just an extension of your health bar. It gives you a chance to get wrecked by a fatal mechanic and then get right back up. The other concession that this game makes to the player in order to facilitate its increased difficulty and punishment is telegraphing. The game telegraphs a lot harder. You get like a big notification whenever an unblockable attack is coming your way, which is basically just to say dodge. But to round this all out, the only way I can really explain why this difficulty works is because it feels fair. It feels like the game is coming at you at a fair rate. Enemies can deflect you, but you can do the exact same thing to them, and nothing really feels like it's overtly broken or shifted in one side's favor. Everything is just that. It's fair. And if you are not strong enough and not up to the challenge, you will be fairly dispatched, and your hard-earned experience points and gold will be fairly taken from you. There's nothing cheap or unwieldy that makes this game feel like it's taking a pot shot or just dragging you down for no reason. Everything is avoidable. I imagine this game will eventually have a run in which a player is not hit. I think it might actually take less time for that run to happen than it has for previous entries in the series, just because of how many tools this game gives you. It's fair in its difficulty. It's fair in its challenge. And that makes victory feel like a big deal. And that's why this game feels so goddamn good. Killing a boss that you know is tough, but you know you can defeat. Killing a boss that you've got even ground with. That feels awesome. And when you pull it off, the game does reward you with different things. You just feel better about bringing that son of a bitch down. It's putting in effort to earn a reward. And in that, we have where Sekiro reaches the iron core of what it means to be a Soulsborne game. Games like this are hard, they're challenging, but they're fair. And when you overcome them, it feels awesome. When you take down that boss, all of that effort rushes back to you in the form of adrenaline, and you throw your arms up in the air and shout. You feel damn good after taking something down you've been stuck on. And that's the appeal of these games. That's what keeps me coming back. And the quest to get there is challenging, it's bumpy, it kicks your ass into the dirt, but at the end of the day, it's goddamn worth it. Sekiro, sorry, that was almost a nostalgious moment. Sekiro is a hard game. There is no question about that. It's a game that not everyone necessarily is going to enjoy. Because out of every Soulsborne game to come out, none more than Sekiro asks you, the player, to get good. This episode of What the Hell is Matt Playing This Week is brought to you by the Orange Hatter Discord, where you can come in and tell me I'm an idiot. There is a link in the description if you really want to do that. And if you don't want to hang out with us and play video games with us or whatever, feel free to leave a comment down below. We still would love to hear from you. Well, we being me. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you did, do the like, subscribe, and bell thing. And I hope to see you again. You all have a great one.